Hello everyone, it's me back with another exciting video. So we're going to kind of cover quite a bit. I might get interrupted in the middle, so remember I don't have video editing software because I'm not cool. But this is sort of like our introduction information to AP Environmental Science, and we're going to call it APES. It's just easier to call it that, so you're an ape. Anyway, so I'm glad you're here taking this class. I think it's going to be a really beneficial class for you. I kind of want to go over the introductory material. You find it like the beginning chapters. I'm going to go through it a little quickly because you're going to be able to pause, take notes, write questions down whenever you need to. You can watch it in chunks, however you want to watch it. And then when you have questions, we'll bring them up in class. So it's sort of like a flipped classroom where you might see a lot of these notes and stuff on your own time and be able to write your notes in your own time. And then we discuss them as a class, which I think is actually better, hopefully. So, nothing's cooler than apes. Like, this is the coolest class, just so you know. All right, so this is not the exact book that we're going to be using. We are using something by these same authors, but they actually have a new book called Environmental Science for AP. So it's actually specifically designed for AP Environmental Science and specifically designed in a way that will kind of be more helpful for AP students. So this is their old book, and we're not going to be using that. We have a new book. I know maybe right at this moment you don't have a book. They've been ordered. I'm looking into being able to get a shareable license of a book that I can share with you guys just so you can use as a reference until we get our book. And I'll let you know, or by the time this comes out, maybe you'll already have it. So environmental science is the study of all the connections in nature, which is what I like. I'm always asking, well, why is this like this? And who said this? And why is this way? I need to know that kind of thing. I like seeing the connections between those things. So the environment we're going to think of is everything around us. And so environmental science is an interdisciplinary science. It connects ideas from the natural sciences like biology and ecology, and then social sciences like geography, politics, economics, maybe some things you haven't really thought about yet, and the humanities, which are things like ethics and philosophy, which should sort of govern a lot of policies that people make. And we're also going to talk about sustainability. That's going to be a big thing in our first lessons and labs. And that's the capacity of Earth's natural systems and our cultural systems to survive and flourish and adapt for the very long-term future. So a lot of the things we do are sort of looking really short-term. Even 100 years in the future is short-term compared to the life of the Earth. So we're going to try to keep that in mind. So you can see here some potentially non-sustainable things like air pollution. We need factories, we need energy to do all the things that we're doing, but keeping things like this, that is not sustainable. Fishing with your friends and family, that can totally be sustainable, but when we look at really large fisheries that dredge up huge portions of the ocean, that might not be sustainable, as we're going to see as we go through the course. So what are the principles of sustainability? Nature has sustained itself for billions of years by using solar energy, biodiversity, and nutrient cycling. And remember, nutrient cycling is things like the water cycle, the carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, so on. Our lives and economies depend on energy from the sun. You're going to be like, well, we're not all solar. You can trace all the energy back that we have on Earth to the sun in some way or another. And on natural resources and natural services, we'll get into these things, natural capital provided by the earth. We'll get to those terms and what those mean in a minute, so don't worry if you're like, what's that? Or you could pause the video and look it up if you want, if you're that excited. So nature's survival strategies follow these three principles of sustainability. Reliance on solar energy. The sun provides warmth, fuels photosynthesis, which is then going to fuel all the energy that we have. Biodiversity. So there's so much, if you remember from biology, so much variety and adaptability of these natural systems of species. Like, you probably spent time talking just about adaptations. We could spend a month just talking about plant adaptations to different things. So it's amazing. And chemical cycling, so the biogeochemical cycles, like the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle. So that circulates chemicals from the environment to living things and then back to the environment. Again, it's sometimes called nutrient cycles or biogeochemical cycles. I know they're kind of boring to talk about, I mean, to be honest, but they fuel everything. They're so essential, and it's important that you guys understand those. So we're going to connect things in nature. How does nature work? How does the environment affect us? How do we, humans, impact the environment? How do we deal with environmental problems, and how can we live more sustainably? And you're going to do an exercise looking at your own personal ecological footprint, which means what's the kind of toll you take on the environment? Are you living a life that's sustainable, that will not cause collapse of these ecological systems, or do we need some kind of change? So here's a bigger picture of those three principles, the reliance on solar energy, biodiversity, and chemical cycling. So we're going to come back to these ideas when we talk about everything. So these are kind of some important key things to take note of. So sustainability has certain key components that I talked about earlier. So that natural capital, sorry, I got to drink water like a lot when I'm talking so much. So natural capital is supported by the solar capital, the incoming solar energy. So we have our natural resources. So those are the useful materials and energy in nature, and natural services. So those are important natural processes like the renewal of air and water and soil. So the natural capital that I mentioned earlier is what it is the natural resources plus the natural services, and that's what we call natural capital. Oops, humans degrade natural capital. So we use our natural resources more than they can be replenished, if they can be. And we put pressure on the natural services like the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle in such a way that it becomes off balance. So that's how we degrade natural capital. So scientific solutions are needed for this environmental sustainability. So we have to figure out ways, we're going to degrade the natural capital because we're going to farm, for instance. How can we do that in a sustainable way that we don't put such an impact on the environment that we lose biodiversity, for example, or we alter one of those biogeochemical cycles? So let's look at this bigger. So here's our natural capital. So our natural resources, those are in blue, and our natural services in orange. So you can pause for a second if you want to just kind of look at these and kind of get an idea of the difference between them. So like our air and our water and our soil and our land, those are our resources. So you guys, I know maybe you're like getting kind of into the weeds here, but you're like, okay, resources, like water is a resource. Thank you, water. And our natural services. So what happens? Water can be purified through natural processes. And then we can do waste treatment. So we can treat our wastewater so that way when it goes back into the environment, we don't have anything added in there, for example. Then we have our nutrient cycling. So here's just an example of the carbon cycle. Like this could be really any cycle, but we're going to talk about the carbon cycle in this instance. So there's organic material in us, like carbon. Living things die, and they're recycled. So they decompose through decomposers and everything, and then it becomes part of the soil again, or it can in the carbon cycle, you can exhale and add CO2 back into the air. And then the organic matter could get reabsorbed into plants and then back into us. So this nutrient cycling is what connects the air, water, the land, the abiotic parts of the environment to the biotic parts of the environment. So when people talk about us being connected to the earth, I mean, that's true. Like we are really connected so intimately with our entire earth. That's why it's important for us to care for it. Okay, even if people are like, well, I don't care about elephants or this or that. Okay, fair, whatever. But this connects to us. So we need to learn about it, understand it, and make sure that we're keeping things sustainable. So here's an example of the degradation of natural capital. So we have forest area, and here you can see a land that's been tilled for farming. It's okay to farm. we need farms. We need to live too. Like, that's a fair statement. But we have to do it in a sustainable way, so we don't lose biodiversity. We don't want to lose species of plants and animals and bacteria and fungi. And we want to make sure that these cycles are not disrupted through our farming. So we have to find, I'm just using farming as one example, we have to find practices that allow us to do these things, but also to stop the degradation of our natural capital. So some resources are renewable, some are not, as you know. So a resource is anything that we get from the environment to meet our needs. Some are directly available to us and living things like sunlight, and some are not, like petroleum, which we like oil. So our perpetual resource is our solar energy, where that's always going to be there. Well, as long as the sun's there. So renewable resources can take from like several days to several hundred years to renew. So that's our forests and grasslands, our air, fertile soil. So after you farm, for example, that the crops pull nutrients out of the soil, but the nutrients can come back if things decompose and we have bacteria and other plants that are kind of working to renew that. And then sustainable yield, that word you might want to, by the way, should have said this. Any of these green words, you can always write some things down. These are things that we're going to refer to in the future. So as you're going on, feel free to take notes, write what you feel is important. Here's an aside. When you're taking notes, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to write every single word that's on a PowerPoint. You can kind of jot down the important parts, like renewable resource. You can just put an example if you're like, I know that. Or if you're like, okay, I didn't know that maybe it only takes several days to renew, or several hundred years. Well, that seems like a lot for a renewable resource. So write down the facts that you don't know, or you're like, I need to know that. You don't need to write every single word. Excuse me. I don't have editing software, so you have to hear that. And then we have sustainable yield. That's the highest rate at which we can use a renewable resource without reducing its available supply. So the sustainable yield of a forest. How many trees can we cut down per year, for example, without it affecting the forest? I don't know. That's different for every area, every forest, every resource, which is why understanding some of these things or making like sustainable plans can be so challenging. So what are some non-renewable resources? Other energy resources, metallic minerals. You're going to mine for gold. There's only so much gold on the planet. We can't make more. It's an element. So that's not renewable. And non-metallic mineral resources like silicone, which we use for lots of things and found in computer chips. It's very useful. It's actually a metalloid, but whatever. Those things are not renewable. Once they're gone from the earth, once we've mined the last piece of gold, it is gone forever and ever. So with that, maybe you've heard these 3 R's before. Usually they say recycle, reduce, reuse, but this is the more appropriate order. We want to reduce our consumption. That's the most important thing we can do, is use less. That means there's less demand. That way these resources will last longer. Then we reuse. So if you have a bottle that you can continually reuse and fill with water instead of using a plastic bottle, that's the perfect idea. Or even if you have a water bottle, a plastic bottle that you buy, and you're like, you know what, I can just refill this and I can use it for the week or something. That's really awesome. Or repurposing these things. And actually the last thing we want to do is recycle, because we don't end up with the most efficient way of doing that. Here's an example of repurposing. I had some lovely trail mix. Now this is my little watering jar for my plant that I have in my classroom. So doing those kinds of things, now I don't need a watering can, so there's less demand for plastic to make that for me. So hopefully that makes sense. So here's a young man who is reusing some of these bottles, and some folks recycling. Thanks, folks. So make sure you do recycle. Something that I really wanted to do this year, and maybe we can still do it when we're back, please let us come back soon and safely, is to really look into what it would entail to start a true recycling program at the school, where we have those blue bins like this in every classroom. I really want to do that. So I think that should be a project we look into doing as a class. So different countries differ in how much they are sustainable and not. And that depends on a lot of these factors that maybe you haven't heard of before, like economic growth. So that's how much a nation is making goods and services. The GDP, maybe you've heard people say that before, or maybe you've read it, or maybe you don't know what that means. It stands for gross domestic product. What does that mean? It's the annual market value of all the goods and services produced by all the businesses, foreign and domestic, that are in a country. So like all the businesses that do stuff in this country, in America, contribute to our GDP. And then the per capita GDP is measurement of economic development. So like if you have a country that's got like a smaller population, maybe they only have 20 million people, but their gross domestic product is high, we can normalize it by saying how much is the GDP per person, which kind of gives you an idea of I guess you could call it the wealth of the nation. When we talk about economic development, that's using economic growth to raise living standards. So more developed countries are found in North America, so like Canada and America and Australia, New Zealand, Japan, most of Europe, and less developed nations. You can find them in most countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America. Sometimes they refer to countries as first world or third world or developed or developing. I encourage you to search about these things and find videos about them if you want to learn more about that sort of thing. So let me see if I have this twice. Oh, I don't. Okay. So this is the gross national income per capita. That means per person. So you might have Russia. This isn't true, but we'll just use this for an example. You might have Russia that has, well, they have fewer people than some other countries. And so they might have a high GDP, but because they have fewer people, it's going to be like less. Okay, let me try to explain that in a better way because I can't edit. So a country like China, they might have a higher GDP. Their number might be huge because they're producing a lot. But there's vastly more people in China than there is in the United States. So if our GDP is the same in the United States compared to China, we're going to be higher up on the gross national income because we have fewer people in America than there are in China. There's like over 1 billion people there, and there's only, I gotta look this up now. I was going to say 250 million, but there might be closer to 300 million people in America now. Feel free to fact check. You can always tell me. And so this just gives you an idea of per person what the average income is in different nations in the world. So how are our ecological footprints affecting the earth? And like I said, we're going to do an activity where you can see yours. As our ecological footprint grows, so your footprint is how much of Earth's resources are you using? What is your, like, just like a footprint you could leave in the sand, like if you had something very heavy, it might leave a deep footprint, or something large might leave like a wide footprint. That's what we're kind of talking about. What's kind of the mark that we leave on Earth? So as our footprints grow, we're depleting and degrading more of Earth's natural capital. Even if we stopped using more, there's more and more people. So that's kind of like what's going on with Earth. So right now, I can tell you we're living unsustainably. And environmental degradation is happening. That's the wasting, depleting, and degrading of our natural capital. And this is happening at an accelerating rate, meaning it's getting faster and bigger. So we're hurting Earth faster and faster every day. So this can also be referred to as natural capital degradation. Can't talk. I'm trying to talk too fast. So what are some examples of that? Do I have this twice? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is bigger and easier for you to see. So our forests are shrinking because we're building stores, homes, schools, farms, factories, whatever. So we're losing forests. That means there's less habitat for wildlife. So that means if their habitat is shrinking, that means their population is shrinking because there's less there's less space for them to exist. There might be less prey. There might be less food if they're an herbivore, which in that case, if their population shrinks beyond a critical point, that population in that area could die out permanently, which leads to species extinction. There's soil erosion. So once we get rid of forests, we start to have desertification, which sounds delicious, but it means you're making more deserts. By the way, here's my pin for today. It's my boy Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. We're polluting the air, and that's causing climate change. Other things are causing climate change too, because more people need water. We're depleting our aquifers. We have to make deeper and deeper and deeper wells. There's fisheries that go out into the ocean. They have to go deeper and deeper to find fish, or they're finding fewer and fewer fish because we're fishing at too much, and we're causing water pollution by oil spills, by the nets that break that just go into the ocean, plastics. So those are some examples of natural capital degradation. So pollution comes from a bunch of sources. That sounds lovely. You have point source. Oh, let's think back to 8th grade. Point source, like a smokestack, you can point to it, there it is, and non-point source, which you're like, I don't know where this pollution might have come from. The main types of pollutants, they can be either biodegradable or non-degradable. And then we have our unwanted effects of pollution, like climate change and illness and species loss. So what can we do? We can clean up if there's a spill, if something happens, if there's plastic in the ocean, we can control the outputs. So if there's pollution happening, we can try to clean it. Or better yet, pollution prevention. So wherever that smokestack is, we're going to put scrubbers and things on it so it's not going to release any toxic chemicals into the air or into the water. So here's an example of point source. There it is, right there. I can point to it. I see that factory is letting smoke into the air. Here's non-point source. Was this from one person? They just took their garbage and dumped it in, and I see them. I don't know. Is this a bunch of people? I have no idea where this pollution came from, how it got here. So that's an example of non-point source pollution. So we kind of tried to talk about, or maybe we didn't yet, depending on when you watch this, but we're going to be talking about the tragedy of the commons. And I'll post some videos about that for you that kind of illustrate that in a really good way. So basically, to give you kind of a summary, it's that there's common areas, or this comes from the common area of sheep grazing that was shared by everybody. And if everybody is using this resource, maybe it's not regulated in some way, people are maybe not going to be careful because it's not theirs. It's just, it doesn't belong to anybody, so it belongs to everybody. So maybe they're going to overuse this common area for grazing, and then all of a sudden it's gone. There's no grass left because it was overgrazed. So we kind of apply that idea to our natural capital, to all the natural resources we have. If it doesn't belong to everyone, well, it belongs to everybody. And so, well, I'll just use a little more and a little more. And, well, I'm just adding, like, it was a tiny spill. Yeah, I poured my gasoline in. It's not going to affect anything. And one person doing that probably really, truly won't. But when you have everybody saying that, yeah, you're going to see these really huge effects. So I'm kind of going to talk about these property rights. You have three types. They can be private, so I own it. No one else can graze on this land or do whatever to his mind. There's common property, which belongs to everybody in the area. And there's open access renewable resources. So common property and these open access renewable resources, when you think about the tragedy of the commons, they get degraded and ruined because people overuse. But with your private property, maybe you're going to take better care of that. So we have to find solutions to that. So a lot of times governments will try to put on regulations. You might have heard say that, or like they're going to talk to factories to regulate how much carbon that they're going to put into the atmosphere, so that way they're not doing that. But really that depends on country to country. And some countries have looser regulations than we do for whatever reason. But the air, for example, affects us all. Okay, that was just a pause for you, but that was a little bit of time for me. So sorry, I don't have editing software, so you have to see all the things that like a good editor would cut out. So this is not at all where we were. Oh my goodness, we were way back over here in like the 30s. I know this is a long one, so I'm going to kind of cut things off. That way you're not watching for like hours and hours and hours. Actually, I'm probably going to cut it off kind of soon, because we'll be talking, or we'll have talked about the tragedy of the commons, and then I can start up again with more of this sort of introduction in the next video. But so what we kind of either talked about already or are talking about in the first few days of class is the tragedy of the commons, like I was saying. Again, a little bit of time has passed for me, so I might be repeating myself, and if I am, I really apologize. But you can take this tragedy of the commons idea as everybody has access to a certain area or set of resources, but it doesn't belong to them. It's sort of like, oh, it's free, it's out there. I can take as much as I want, or I can use as much as I need to. And if people all adopt that same line of thinking, then what could end up happening is that that common area and that common resource is depleted. So that's why regulations need to be put in place. That's why people need to communicate and work together and understand, so that way these resources aren't gone, because we're getting to the point in human history where that's a true worry. As in the next 50 to 100 years, we could lose some of these resources forever if we don't change. So I'm not trying to scare you, but I am trying to make sure that you understand the seriousness of what we're talking about. So, like I said, you're going to be looking at your ecological footprint here in the next couple days. We'll do a little test and you can answer some questions and start thinking about that. Hopefully in this class, what you will do is start thinking about the ways that you impact the environment and how you want to change so that way things are better. Because my opinion is we all need to do some little small things to change, and the corporations who are adding to this in a very vast way need to change, and we need to advocate for the government to change and impose either regulations or pass some kinds of laws that are going to protect the environment, because it can't just be us recycling. Like, that's going to help, but there's a lot of other factors involved. It's not just us. So we do need to change, but everybody needs to change. That's what I think. So let's talk about what your ecological footprint is. It's the amount of biologically productive land and water needed to provide the people in a region with indefinite supply of renewable resources and to absorb and recycle waste and pollution. So I know I just read off the slide. But so what does that mean? That means how much land do you need to sustain you, for example? How much land and water do you need to sustain you and the way that you are acting and using resources today? And when you take this little test, what it will show you at the end is, okay, well, how many Earths would we need to sustain if everybody on Earth acted like you do right now? And then you can kind of think of it as how much time would it take from now until we ran out of resources if everybody lived the way you do at the time that you take this quiz. And maybe it'll surprise you. Maybe you'll be like, oh, that's more time than I thought, or maybe that's less time than I thought. I don't want to even say anything about it because I want you to sort of get the full experience when you take this little quiz. It's not like a quiz like that. It's like a little, those quizzes they have like on those different websites, like, okay, well, do you feel more like a bunny or do you feel more like a cat or a dog? It's that kind of quiz, not like a graded quiz. And then you can think of the per capita ecological footprint. So basically like the average ecological footprint divided by every person. So when does that become unsustainable? Like, as in the earth can't handle that anymore. That's if your footprint is larger than the biological capacity for replenishment. So I know my head's in the way, sorry. I know that sounds kind of like what? So if the amount of land and water you need is larger than what the earth has available and can do, then that is unsustainable. That means it's off balance. It's like your bank account. If you're I'm not going to try to use my bank account. Um, these are the jokes. Okay, but if you bring home $100 every week, and let's just say you have you saved up a little bit and you have $1,000 in the bank, and you've been going out and buying coffee. Today it's this cup. If you've been going out and buying coffee, and remember when we could go out and get coffee and go to the movies and stuff, or you've been buying books, or you've been spending money in your video games, like you're like, well, I really want to download this playable character or whatever. And you're spending $120 a week. That's unsustainable. Eventually you're going to run out of money. Like, you're going to pull from your savings. And yes, you're going to replenish, but you're going to replenish $100 when you're spending $120. So that's unsustainable. And for us, they'd call that getting into debt. But for the earth, that's that's called pollution and global climate change. So you can see that the consequences for that are vastly different. I think we'll end with these two pictures. So these are there is this book. It's really cool. It was done, I think, in the 80s, and I don't have it. But you can find pictures of this. People were asked in different parts of the world to to show their homes, to stand with their family in front of their home and have their possessions out in front, so you could kind of see what was in the house. And you could see from different parts of the world, how much stuff people have. So this is an American family. So this is you can, just the hair and the styles, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the 80s. Maybe early 90s. With his shorts, I'd give it 90 or 91 at the latest. But that way you can kind of see what kind of the amount of things that people have. And talking about living sustainably, when we're buying stuff, are we buying stuff because we want it or because we need it? And then if we're constantly consuming these products, we're constantly buying and buying and buying, well, then they need to be produced. And the production of these goods is going to cause people to produce potentially toxic chemicals, for plastic stuff. It's going to cause, if I have scissors, someone had to get the metal for these out of the earth. That metal is not going to go back into the earth ever. It's here now. I can't mine it again. Maybe this could be recycled if I ever stop using them. But for now, these are actually really cool. They look like a bird. See? It's a bird. Anyway, back to reality. So that's another piece when we talk about the ecological footprint. Are we living sustainably? And what does that mean to us? Does that mean you shouldn't have anything? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. It's just we have to try to live within our means and try to live sustainably, so that way other people can live too. And that's where we get back to the tragedy of the commons. Yeah, I'm guilty of this too. We all want, yeah, I want more. I want this. I want that. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I have money. I can buy that. Like my pin. I like my pin today. You want another one. You're like, yeah, this is a cool pin. Oh, there's another one like it. Yeah, I want that too. But again, when we're gonna connect this sustainability idea to the tragedy of the commons, we just kind of consume and consume. It's there. Let me buy it. Let me get more. Yeah, they're gonna make more. I want the new iPhone. I want this. I want. But we don't. The problem is we don't see. It's not the commons. We don't see the grass getting eaten. We can't see maybe necessarily the factory adding pollution to the air, or the shipping tanker crossing the ocean and how much gas that is, or if they're dumping stuff into the ocean. We don't see that. We don't see the toll on human life to produce these goods at a low cost. And I think maybe if we thought about those or saw those, kind of like how we could see the commons getting wrecked, then maybe we would be more willing to live in a sustainable manner or understand what that entails. So I know this is a little bit longer of a video, but what I want you to consider is this is your notes. So these are the things that I wanted you to take notes on and think about, and that we can discuss. You can talk to me about things that you like or didn't like, or things that you agree with or don't agree with. And then we can talk about those kinds of things in class and help kind of understand these a little bit better, and get a better perspective. And that way we're not spending all this time when we have class together just listening to me go on about about notes and stuff in your writing. You can take it at your own pace. I'd love to know next time we talk how this is working for you, or how you like that, and if it works for you in your current setup. And if it doesn't, you can tell me one-on-one, you can email me, whatever you need to do. But I want to make sure that we're using our class time wisely as we can. We're getting to have discussions, because that's a huge important part of APES, I think, of any AP subject. And like, we're doing any kind of demonstration I can do during that time that we're live together. So let me know how this works. I hope that it helps you understand these things. I will post these notes up for you to look at your own time, so you can click through the slides as I go through, or whatever you want to do with them. So yeah, so this is like the first video that I made. I hope it helps. I hope that you're interested, or you're at least like want to know more. And then we'll keep going. We'll keep learning. All right. Well, I will talk to you soon. Hopefully this video was okay, even though I had a big pause in the middle. All right. Bye.